All right, everyone. So today's the lesson for Tuesday, January 11th. And again, if you don't have your math binder at home or anything, that's fine. Just use a sheet of paper. Okay, for the MDI, make sure you write down day 7 so we know which day it is. So if we go to grade it, okay, it just makes it a little bit easier for us. All right, so number 1, we need to solve for x. And you'll notice, just like before, this is going to be a two-step equation, as we need to kind of get rid of two things. So looking at the equation, remember, we want to keep the x by itself, so we don't want to touch this. So what do we need to get rid of first? If you said we need to get rid of the 1, or if that's what you were thinking, you are correct. Now right here, there's nothing in front of this 1. Okay, so remember, if there's nothing in front of it, we know the number's positive. And that might make it a little bit easier, because if this is positive 1, we would need to do the inverse, and the inverse of adding 1 is subtracting 1. So to get rid of this 1, I need to subtract it from this side. And if I subtract it from this side, I need to subtract it to the other side. So we know 1 minus 1 is going to give us 0. So nothing comes down. That's kind of how some teachers are going to show you that it cancels out. Okay, but we know it doesn't really cancel out, just equals 0. Then this negative 3x on this side comes down. Make sure you keep the negative sign. And then we have our equal sign and negative 14 minus 1. Make sure you read it from the top bottom. Negative 14 minus 1, which gives us negative 15. Now we have negative 3x equals negative 15. If you remember, negative 3x means multiplication. So once again, we have to do the inverse. And the inverse of multiplying is dividing. So to get rid of negative 3, I have to divide by negative 3. And just like everything in math, if I divide from this side, I have to divide on the other side. So we know negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. So I could write 1x, but that's actually incorrect in math. The correct way, or the formal way, would just to be to write x equals, and negative 15 divided by negative 3 is positive 5. Right. Number 2, again, this is a two-step equation. So go ahead and write it down. Put your line through the equal sign. I recommend you pause the video right now and try it on your own. Okay. But looking at this, we know, again, x we save for the end. And this one has negative 3 connected to it. So we don't want to touch that. So I do want to get rid of the negative 7, though, because you know how negative 7 is just hanging out by itself? There's no x attached to it. So negative 7 or minus 7, I need to do the inverse. And we know the inverse of subtracting 7 is adding 7. And if I add 7 on this side, I can also add 7 to the other side. And that's how I balance it. So if there's nothing under the negative 3x, so that comes down. We know negative 7 plus 7 is going to be 0, so we leave that be. My equal sign comes down. And now I have negative 12 plus 7. Well, those are different signs, so I know I can subtract. And then negative 12 minus 7 gives me 5. And the 12 is bigger, so I keep the negative sign. So 3x equals negative 5.
Anna Neiman, please come to the main office. Anna Neiman, please come to the main office.
Now I have negative 3x. And we know that means multiplication, just like the last problem. So the inverse of multiplying is dividing. So I divide this side by negative 3. And if I do it to one side, I do it to the other side. So I take negative 5 divided by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. So 1x. But like I said, we just keep it as x. And then negative 5 divided by negative 3. Go ahead, punch that in your calculator. And you'll find out that's going to give you a big long decimal. So we're going to keep it as a fraction. And because they're both negative, they're actually going to turn positive. So x is going to equal 5 over 3. All right, go ahead, grab out your bell ringer. Okay, pause the video if you're not ready to move on. Okay, we are doing the bell ringer for Tuesday and Wednesday, so we're doing 2 days worth. Again, if you don't have your bell ringer sheet, go ahead and mark it Tuesday 1 through 5, and then we'll do another column for Wednesday. So if you remember from yesterday, our little trick to solving these is making the triangle. And the triangle goes negative, negative, positive. So let's look at number 1. I have -6 times -3. Well, I know from yesterday that I can just cover up. See if I can make a little square here. So I know I can cover up negative, negative, and I'm left with a positive. So my answer is going to be positive 6 times 3 is 18. So positive 18. And again, we don't need to write the plus sign. Let's look at number 2. I have negative and positive. So I cover up a negative, I cover up a positive, and I'm left with negative. And 7 times 8 is 56. So my answer is negative 56. Right. 3, positive and positive. So we talked about this one yesterday. I do not have 2 positives on my triangle, but we know from elementary school, if I just take 2 positive numbers, my answer is going to be positive. So 16 divided by 4, or you can look at it, 4 times what is 16 is 4. All right, number 4, negative and positive. So I cover up a negative, I cover up a positive. I am left with this negative right here. So my answer is going to be negative. And 12 divided by 6 is 2. So my answer is negative 2. And going down to number 5, remember you cannot use a calculator in your quiz. So we need to solve this using scale factor. So there's this one we can actually go both ways. So let's go from 5 to 25. 5 times what is 25? Well, we know 5 times 5 is 25. But now on top, if my arrow goes the same direction, I'm asking myself, what times 5 is 15? And then we know our basic fact, 3 times 5 is 15. So x equals 3. Now we are going to show you a different way. So I know going this way, my arrows mean multiply. But if I flip my arrows and go this way, then I can divide. So 25 divided by 5 gives me 5. So I know 25 divided by 5 is 5. So I do it to the top. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So I could also solve it that way. And again, we are doing 2 today because it's a short week. So we're going to look at Wednesday. So negative, negative, positive. All right, go ahead, pause the video, take a few minutes, and solve Wednesday. All right, let's look at number 1. I have positive and negative. So I cover up a positive, I cover up a negative, I am left with negative. So I know my answer is going to be negative. And 63 divided by 7. So remember, another way to do division is to think about reverse multiplication. So 7 times what is 63? And we know that 7 times 9 is 63, so my answer is negative 9. And let's look at number 2. I have negative and negative. So I cover up both negatives. I'm left with a positive, so my answer is going to be positive. And negative 42 divided by 6, or again, you can look at it, 6 times what is 42 is 7. All right, let's look at 3. I have a positive and a negative, so I cover up positive and negative. I'm left with a negative, so my answer is negative. And 12 times 3, well, 12 times 3 is 36, so my answer is 36. And number 4, I have 2 negatives. So I cover up both negatives. I'm left with positive and 20 times 10. Well, a little trick, if you ever multiply by 10, I can just multiply my two digits, my first two digits. So 2 times 1 is 2, and then I count my zeros. So I have 1, 2 zeros. So my answer is 200. All right, then jump into number 5. I know my two numbers are 3 and 21, so I start up top. 3 times 7 is 21. So if I multiply the top by 7, I multiply the bottom by 7. And 7 times 7 is 49. All right, again, make sure you have all that down. Make sure everything's labeled. So this part should say Wednesday. Go ahead, pause the video, and open up lesson 3. And again, if you don't have your binder at home, that's fine. You can just take the notes we're going to do for lesson 3 on scratch paper. All right, Unit 5, Lesson 3. We're talking about changing elevation. Now, elevation is like mountains. Okay, the higher the mountain is, the higher the elevation is. Okay, the lower the mountain is, the less the elevation is. It's the same as temperature. So let's do a review from yesterday's lesson. The temperature was -5. Then the temperature rose 5 degrees. Well, rose is the past tense of rise. If something rises, we know it gets bigger. Okay, so if it gets bigger, we know it's going to be a positive number. So it's an adding problem. I'm going to add a positive number if it gets bigger. So -5, it rose 5 degrees. So we have -5 plus 5. Well, let's check on our number line. My first number is -5, so I point to the first number. I'm going to add 5, so notice the number line goes by 5, so I add 5, and my top arrow now points to 0. So -5 plus 5 is 0. All right, a climber was 30 feet above sea level. Then she descended 30 feet. So we know from yesterday we're doing addition problems. But what does descended mean? So descended means you're going down. So if I descend from the mountain, I go down from the mountain. Or if I descend from sea level, I go down below sea level. So if I'm descending 30 feet, I'm going down, which would be -30. So we'll solve using our number line. So I start at 0. My first arrow points to 30. My second arrow says -30. So I'm going to go to the left 30. So as a reminder, my numbers are counting by 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And my top arrow now points to 0. So 30 plus -30 is 0. And again, I know I'm going fast, but that's why you can take your time, pause the videos, watch them a couple times. All right, so now the next part. This part's kind of silly, but just wants to get you the idea of thinking what the opposite is. So let's look at the first thing. Running 150 feet east. What would be the opposite of running 150 feet east? Right, east is one direction. So if I'm going to run in the opposite direction, I'm going to run 150 feet west. The next one, jumping down 10 steps. Well, what's the opposite of jumping down 10 steps? Right, the opposite's jumping up 10 steps. And the final one, pouring 8 gallons of water into a fish tank. So what would be the opposite of pouring water into a fish tank? Right, the opposite would be pouring the water out of the fish tank or dumping 8 gallons out of the fish tank. So this was just to get you thinking of what opposites are. Just something, a quick little piece of information. A mountaineer is someone who climbs mountains. And a spelunker is someone who explores caves and caverns. So there's going to be some word problems that use the terms mountaineer and spelunker. So just know mountaineers referring to people that climb mountains, and spelunkers are referring to people that explore caves. All right, so go ahead. If you don't have your math binder at home, go ahead, pause the video, copy this table down in your notebook. I'm just going to move right away, but make sure you pause it so you have time to write it down. So we're looking at our table. You're going to notice my starting elevation for these first four is all 400. So because that's my starting elevation, that's the first number in my equation. So I'm actually going to come over here and do 400 plus right away for each of them, just to be a little efficient with my process. Because I know all four of my equations are starting with 400. Then let's look at number one. My change is 300 up. So if I'm going up, am I going to add a positive or negative number? Just like temperature, with elevation, if I'm going up, it's going to be a positive number because I'm going to get higher, I'm going to get bigger. So 400 plus 30, which equals 700. All right, number two, I'm starting at 400, but now I'm going down 150. So with elevation and temperature, if I'm going down, my number is going to get smaller. And because it's decreasing, I know I'm going to use a negative number. So for this one, I'm taking 400 plus negative 150. Which gives me 250. All right, the next one, I'm starting at 400 once again, but now I'm going down 400. Well, we just said if we go down, we know we're using a negative number. So 400 plus negative 400. What you notice here, the same number, a positive negative, is always going to equal 0. Now the next one's kind of tricky. The next one gives us the starting number. We know it's going to be addition, but it also gives us our final answer of 50, a positive 50. So the question is, what goes in that gap? I want you to pause the video, see if you can figure out any strategies of what can go in there. All right, hopefully you came up with some good strategies. One strategy all the kids went to use right away is called the old guess and check strategy. We had kids putting in numbers all day. 400 plus 20. Well, that's 420. That's not 50. 400 plus negative 100. Well, that's 300. And just kind of going until they got the right answer. I would not recommend the guess and check strategy. Could it work? Yes. But there's much more efficient ways to do it. One way I like to do it is, what if I put, let's just say, an X in there? Now look, oh my gosh, I have a full equation. I had all I needed but one piece. So I could put in an X in there, which means any number for that piece. And then you know what? I think I could solve it just like the warm-ups. I put a line down here. I know I can't touch the X, but I can touch the 400. So what's the inverse of positive 400? Well, that would be negative. So if I subtract 400 from this side, I can subtract 400 from this side. And I know I'm going to be left with X equals 50 minus 400, which is negative 350. So what was my change here? My missing value was negative 350, which would actually be written as 350 down. All right, once again, pause the video. Go ahead, write down this table in your notes. Okay, this table's really no different. We're just using new numbers. So it says over here, my starting elevation is negative 200 every time. So for my equations, I'm going to start with negative 200 plus, just so I don't get work and then confuse myself. I know I'm always starting the same. All right, my change for number one, 150 down. So we know if I'm working with elevation or temperature, if I'm going down, okay, I'm going to get smaller, which means it's going to be a negative number. So I'm going to add negative 150. A negative 200 plus negative 150 is negative 350. All right, number two. I'm starting with negative 100. I'm going up 100. So I'm going to get bigger. So if my number's getting bigger, I know it's going to be positive. So I'm adding 100. So negative 200 plus 100 equals negative 100. All right, three, negative 200, and I'm going up 200. Well, once again, if I'm going up, my number is going to get bigger, so it has to be a positive number. So negative 200 plus 200 equals 0. And the fourth one, I'm starting with negative 200. I'm going up 250. So once again, if I'm going up, it's getting bigger. It's going to be a positive number. So negative 200 plus 250 gives me 50. Now let's look at this last one. Once again, it gives us our starting number of negative 200. It gives us our change or our final elevation of negative 500. We're missing our change. We're missing what number is going to go in that gap. So like we did before, you could, yes, put in every number in the world until you find the right answer, or we can be efficient and just put a variable in there. So let's do x again. So now we just have a basic one-step equation. How do I move negative 200? Well, I do the inverse, which is add 200. And if I do it to this side, I have to do it to the other side. And negative 500 plus 200 is negative 300. Then you could just check your answer. Negative 200 plus negative 300 gives us negative 500. And we know that is correct. And the final thing for today, just look at this table quick. Don't need to write anything down. Well, you notice this table. If I start with positive 200 and I add negative 200, I get 0. And if I start with negative 20 and I add positive 20, I also get 0. So what's the little trick here? How do I know my answer is going to be 0? Yes, it's if I have a positive and negative number, okay, and I'm adding them together. If they're the same number, it's always going to be 0. So that is it for today's lesson. There is homework, though. You need to make sure you do your Unit 5, Lesson 2 practice problems. You have numbers 1 through 5. Okay, if you have any questions on those, there is the homework videos on Google Classroom. They can also reach out to me. Thank you again. Have a